Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, joined by Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach, and today, and Kyle's, by the way, from the Brooks Beast from Eastern Oregon University, coach to the stars, even helped Kate Courtney go to her Leadville course record this weekend, and Keegan Swenson to his win too. Very exciting stuff. We're going to talk today about how to lose weight safely for cyclists and keep it off. We're going to have an open discussion about weight loss. Socially, Kyle, it's not very, it's a complicated thing to talk about. And I'm going to be very transparent right now. This podcast will be heard by tens to hundreds of thousands of people. There will be people all across the spectrum of their relationship with food that are going to be listening to this. We will risk at times telling people that may have issues with food. Some of this may be triggering to you. So if you don't want to listen to it, don't listen to it. And that goes on both sides of the fence. Okay, that's not just a deprivation perspective, but that's on the other side. But for all those that do want to listen to this, we will be talking about it and we'll be talking about it openly. However, I do want to caveat the fact that you're not going to hear us talk about extremist tactics here, extreme deprivation or extreme binging or something else like that. That's not what we're here to talk about. We aren't here to be alarmist. Instead, we are here to give really responsible guidance on what to do about, in this case, weight management for cyclists in a sport where weight is obviously something that does absolutely have a bearing effect on performance. I'm going to read a couple questions, Kyle, that maybe serve as points of reference. And then I'd like to kind of assume just like a fictitious athlete and if that they want to lose weight. And then we can kind of run through some basic guidelines of what you'd want to do for them. This will be a shorter episode than normal because of time constraints. So I'll just read these things quick.
Cool.
Brandon says, I've been riding for a few years and started doing a few months of structured training this past off season. In just a couple months' time, I saw FTP gains and was convinced that structured training was the best way to go. Good on you. Admittedly, when the weather is nice, I have found it harder to stick to structured training as I like to kind of just go out and ride and have fun. One other thing I have taken more seriously is nutrition, in particular carb intake during harder intervals, efforts, and longer endurance rides, referencing 60 to 90 grams of carbs via drink mix and or gels. However, after a recent annual exam with my primary care doctor, I learned that my percentage of body fat, particularly in my belly, had increased along with my overall weight and most surprisingly, my cholesterol. My doctor happens to be a former competitive cyclist, so we've had at-length conversations about fueling, and he has discouraged me from using carb mix as he thinks that the sugar is not only contributing to my weight gain, but also my cholesterol. I have a bad family history when it comes to heart-related disease, so we keep a close eye on my cholesterol. How am I supposed to fuel my rides, becoming a better athlete and getting faster if I can't take in the carbs that I need to fuel these efforts? This whole thing is somewhat floating because I ride to keep myself healthy and active in the first place. I really appreciate the TrainerRoad platform and the podcast and you taking the time to answer my questions. So this athlete, I really would direct Brandon specifically to listen to the last podcast that we did together, Kyle, where we talked all about really like carbohydrate metabolism and the mechanics of the whole thing and understanding it for active individuals and others. Just because somebody's a doctor, that doesn't mean that they have the perfect understanding on all of these things here. So I'm not saying that high carb intake is just like take out whatever you want and your health will be fine. I'm not saying the opposite either. And Kyle, I'm sure you'll address that in just a bit. Now I'm going to read Ryan's question, which kind of represents something similar, but maybe a bit more on a different side of the spectrum emotionally. I'm writing to you as a frustrated overweight cyclist. I've increased my activity levels through upping my step count between 10 to 15,000 steps per day. And I've increased my training volume from nothing 3 years ago to typically 8 hours per week with my coach. My threshold power has increased from 224 up to 251, but my weight remains stubbornly stuck around 185 pounds. My goal has been to get to 150 pounds at my 5'7" height, but I've only dropped 15 pounds through this whole process. My frustration comes from hearing people just say fuel the work and carbs, carbs, carbs all day, but that seems to get me nowhere and weight loss seems taboo to talk about these days. So can you have a candid discussion on this? So Kyle, I think it might be most effective to have a discussion first on this doctor's perspective that this athlete's weight gain or increase in what seems like subcutaneous fat. I'm not sure when he said his belly, if he was referencing visceral fat or if that was separated, but this increase in belly fat, he says, and his doctor says that could be driven by this carb intake, and that he should not be taking in carbs when he rides, and that it could also be contributing to a high cholesterol value. How do you feel about that guidance first? And not obviously we don't know the patient, natively there, but how do you feel about that guidance first? And then let's get into practical suggestions.
Yeah. I mean, this is really, really tough without more information and without speaking to the individual. Like, that's just the reality of it. So, and the reason why I say that it's tough is not because like, wow, that sounds great. There's like real reasons that you would want to follow up, and we just are getting like little snippets of the story from the question. So it's hard to like really fully understand. Now, I'm not trained as a medical doctor. I'm trained as a researcher, a PhD, and then I apply this um, typically in kind of the athletic setting, the performance setting. But in doing that and in working with people and working with a variety of people and reading papers and things like this, you end up getting sort of an idea of um, where sort of different people are under different circumstances, not just like elite athletes. So putting that context and making sure that that's like really clear, and this is purely from my perspective. There's a couple things. One is that based on my understanding and sort of emerging, and this isn't new like within the last year, but it's been emerging over the last probably decade. Cholesterol, and he references cholesterol is like really highly genetic. There's a lot of people with what is considered dyslipidemia that are active, healthy, these types of things. So when we talk about this, like say we're in a sports nutrition class and we're talking about lipids and dyslipidemia and things like that, I always make sure to have that as a caveat, that there's this like really strong genetic component to it. And that can be tied to adverse heart events over time from a familiar standpoint. So we know that like, cardiovascular disease, there's a bunch of different sort of like, that's a big umbrella term. It's like the number one kind of reason that people die in the United States. It is, but it's something we know a lot more about. It's not just like, okay, I don't know if you have triglycerides. If your LDL is 99, you're perfectly fine, and if it's 101, you're like completely out of control. So there's
that
all
same
these
threshold problem.
Yeah,
that we see.
and so there's all these like subtleties to it. So there's an HDL to LDL ratio. There's the triglycerides. So he said my cholesterol is high, and that can mean a lot of different things. Like if he's actually eating healthier and doing a lot, he may genetically have a higher LDL, but now he's raised his HDL, which would raise his total cholesterol, which would actually, if his HDL to LDL cholesterol ratio has improved, that's actually a good sign, even though his total cholesterol has gone up. And this can largely be genetic. The tie-in with carbohydrates is a unique one. So if we think about it as far as like, okay, if this doctor has seen this, then what's the physiological mechanisms that would like make that true? That's kind of where my mind goes. I don't just say like, no, carbs have nothing to do with cholesterol. And what we do know is that, and we've talked about this in episodes before, that carbs are fat sparing. So as humans, we, in terms of subcutaneous fat and overall adiposity, we're not good at turning carbs into fat in terms of it contributing to overall adiposity. Now, other animal species are really good at this. You feed a cow a bunch of grain, they get way more marbled than an elk that's eating grass or whatever. Like if you, or if you even say in the same species, like grass-fed beef is completely different than grain-fed beef, because of that ability to kind of turn carbohydrates into fat. And mice do this really well. Rats do this really well. We actually use without genetically modifying a rat, you can feed them a high sucrose diet, so 50% sugar, 50% fructose, and you can get them very fat, both viscerally and subcutaneously, pretty quickly. And it's like a model that you can use for uh, dyslipidemia and things like that. So there's a lot there. Now, our liver does it okay as a means, as like a signaling mechanism. So our liver can have de novo lipogenesis, what it's called, like basically making fat from non-fat sources. So our liver can
Mm.
do that to a certain extent, but it's more for like signaling purposes. It's not necessarily for like storage. But we do know that if you like flood the liver with a ton of carbon, so for example, really high carbohydrate intake, really high fructose intake. The liver preferentially traps fructose in it, and that sort of floods metabolic pathways that aren't necessarily meant to have that much carbon.
Mhm.
It's hopefully this is making a little bit of sense. And so basically you can drive de novo lipogenesis in the liver to a greater degree than overall adiposity. So this is where
Okay.
we've seen this
Fatty
rise.
liver disease?
Yeah,
Is
so
that
this
the
is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the technical name for it, NAFLD. So this was something that we were studying at the lab that I did my PhD in back in the late 2000s. We were quite interested in this phenomenon because that lipid dysregulation then leads to because the main fat that's made when carbohydrates turn into fat in the liver is palmitate, which is a 16 carbon saturated fat, and it seems to it can cause some issues in hepatocytes and things like that. So,
okay.
and different people seem to have different sort of sensitivities to their cholesterol sort of processing. And the liver is the clearinghouse for cholesterol. So LDL, chylomicrons. Uh, so like when you eat a meal that has fat in it, that fat is hydrophobic, but our body is largely
Water.
aqueous. And so what you do immediately in the postprandial state or the post-eating state is you package that fat into these things called chylomicrons. And they're big fat balls, but they have an aqueous outer layer and a fatty inside. And that's how we distribute the fat. So I think of this as like Amazon trucks or FedEx trucks. This is how I describe it, where you get this big shipment of this stuff and it has to go out to all these different places. It has to get to certain tissues. It has to get to adipose tissue. It goes, and the liver is sort of central command for all of this. So when we talk about like carbohydrate and protein absorption, we talk about it through the gut, into the portal circulation, through the liver, and then out into the systemic circulation. Whereas fat is actually taken in through the lymph. So it's packaging these chylomicrons and then it gets into the lymph system and slowly works its way into the circulation. So levels of fatty acids and both chylomicrons, free fatty acids are elevated for hours and hours after, much longer than levels of amino acids or carbohydrates in the post-exercise state. So you have
Hmm.
those fatty balls kind of floating around, like they eventually they drop some fat off in adipose tissue. They interface with some other tissues, but mostly they go to the liver, and the liver decides what happens. And basically what you end up with are these like different size balls of fat floating around. And depending on how much fat is in them, it dictates their density. And
Mhm.
so the more fat they have, the less dense they are. And so you have chylomicrons, which are the biggest and least dense because they have the most fat. Those aren't in the system for very long. And then you have this suite of what are called lipoproteins that we just call cholesterol. So you have VLDL, which is very low density lipoproteins. You have LDL, which is low density lipoprotein, and HDL, which is high density lipoproteins. And these are just balls that have aqueous outer layers. So they have a phosphate on the outside. They have a lipid tail on the inside. So they play nice with fat on the inside. And this is how we mass transport fat around. Now, in addition
Interesting.
to that, we have circulating triglycerides, which are like the main storage form of fat, which is where that's and then we have circulating free fatty acids. And free fatty acids are individual fats that are attached to this sort of aqueous boat called albumin. And that's how, like, when you're exercising, for example, and you're in zone 1 or zone 2, and we call that our fat burning stage, we're
Mhm.
actually breaking down triglyceride, which is the storage form of fat in adipose tissue. We're liberating that into individual free fatty acids, attaching it to albumin, sending it to the muscles that are working. Those muscles take it up and they start to use it. And the so all this, what I'm trying to do is paint a picture that suggests that when you overeat in carbohydrate, the timing of carbohydrate intake is really, really important. Because if you're just saying, well, I'm riding my bike a lot, so I'm going to eat a lot of carbohydrates, then you're never. So there's this old nutrition saying where they say, like, fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate. Because if
Mhm.
you don't, if you always have carbs, your body will preferentially use those. And when people gain weight on high carb diets, it's because they're in caloric excess and they have too much carbs. It's not because those carbs are turning into fat.
Mhm.
It's just it's fat sparing. And when fat sits around for a long time, especially in non-adipose tissue, it has a tendency to not be great for the tissues that it resides in, which is why things like visceral fat, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, fat infiltration into non-adipose tissue organs, and even intramuscular triglyceride, which is fat stored inside muscle, that a person with a really high percentage of body fat and very low activity may have the same intramuscular triglyceride as a world tour rider, but
Hmm.
one has increase in, there's a bunch of different uh there's a bunch of different mechanistic theories about why this causes dysregulation with things like insulin sensitivity and things like that at the site of the muscle when there's a lot of fat around. But it does seem that the saturation level of the fat and the rate of fat turnover really matters. So in
Hmm.
a highly trained endurance athlete, they could have a lot of fat inside their muscle and it doesn't cause problems because it's constantly getting turned over, utilized. When fat sort of sits in non-adipose tissue, that's when we see these some of these like dysregulatory functions. So the point is that the point is that if an individual is just saying, well, I ride a bike a lot, carbs are the new thing, I just need carbs, 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 and they have a propensity and a history for dyslipidemia and high cholesterol and fat dysregulation, and now they're not using as much fat as they normally would because they're eating a lot more carbohydrate and they're kind of not cognizant of the timing, then you can see where you're basically having this fat sparing effect. You may not store fat all that well in adipose tissue, which means you have more fat in your liver, which means your liver's trying to distribute that in creative ways, which raises your cholesterol. So there's like kind of a tie there that could potentially be linked to it. It's not like that carb is turning into cholesterol though. And cholesterol again is this misleading term because cholesterol is referring to these lipoproteins and these lipoproteins are always in flux. And they're largely they're large there's a huge genetic component to where your lipid levels are and where your cholesterol levels are and what your kind of lipid profile looks like. And yeah, you can affect that to a certain extent with diet. You can affect that to a certain extent with exercise. But as people age, if they haven't hit on that magic formula, we have like, and again, I'm not a doctor, but I know that we have like amazing drugs to help control these things, even in the face of
Mhm.
people that are exercising regularly and feel like at least perceive themselves as eating healthy. So it's a
Yeah.
super complicated question. I know I gave a lot of background there, which is why it sort of justifies why I'm hesitant to give a specific answer. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the carbs are doing it, or no, the carbs aren't. You'd really have to like sit down with this person and their physician and look at their family history, the medical history, the meds that they're on, maybe even do some genetic testing to look for, which like which version of certain genes, like the APO gene
Yeah.
and different things like that you have that we know are associated with those are genetic drivers of higher rates of cholesterol. So yeah.
I'm gonna be bold here and
Yeah.
hazard a bit of a guess, and then this will transition into the next
Sure.
question that we also got from this athlete. But um, it does seem that in many cases, I hear some athletes mention the fact that like they've increased carb intake, and they reference often the carb intake that they're taking on the bike. And then some, and I shouldn't say often. I've seen this on the TrainerRoad forum a couple of times, and I've heard this from athletes where they say that they then have had health scans or screens like we're talking about here, and some sort of unfavorable change happened with their health. And oftentimes they cite the fact that they were taking in a certain amount of grams per hour on the bike, and that must be the reason. In reality, it seems like that while that may be something that they're focusing on with their nutrition, they may be missing the boat on the rest of the things that they're doing habitually in their daily life with their carbohydrate intake. And again, we're operating on assumptions here, but
Yeah.
it would be quite odd if a person was taking in 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour on the bike, and that in and of itself, if that was the only thing that changed, but nothing else changed, and then there was a change in an individual's cholesterol and health and that sort of thing, that would seem, based on the mechanisms in place, that would seem unlikely, and it would
I
seem to imply that there would be other things causing that. And I'm
Yeah.
example number one of making this mistake where I confuse my
Yes.
own life for a laboratory
Right.
experiment, and I
Yeah.
hyperfixate on the thing I'm measuring,
Right.
and I totally ignore
Ignore.
all the other
Yeah.
stuff that I'm doing, which composes 98% of my nutrition intake.
So I think it's reasonable to make this assumption. I also want to be careful in the sense that the um the the intaking the carbohydrate craze on the bike is uh I think the most important when you're going really hard and when you're doing really quality training. I do think that there is a place for kinda, uh, just moderate carbohydrate or lower carbohydrate or
Yes.
even, like, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. So where the carbohydrate thing has gotten really exciting is that, we worked on these assumptions for a long time, which is that the gut can't handle more than like 40 grams of carbs per hour. And they did some elegant studies to suggest that. Um, but then there started to be studies that like you could train your gut and then you could increase your carbohydrate intake. And then you started to look at some of these studies that are really looking at things like time to exhaustion, 90% of your lactate threshold. Like you're redlining it in terms of you're not only just below your lactate threshold, but you're dipping above lactate threshold and then backing off, and you're doing these types of things. And we know without a doubt that carbohydrates are like an incredible ergogenic aid under those circumstances.
Yep.
Even if you're not going long enough to threaten your glycogen stores, you still want to be full of glycogen because it makes your brain happy, it makes your central nervous system, it provides like we know a lot about how important this is. Now, if you conflate this with just like the more carbohydrates I eat, the better,
Yeah.
and
Which is common, I think.
which
That's
is
a
common,
common.
and so then you maybe increase junk food intake, you stop paying attention to timing, and then you're also forcing 90 to 100 grams of carbs on like recovery rides. Then I think you can potentially get yourself into trouble and those types of things. The other thing is that you see a lot of these types of things in the aging population or middle-aged population, which is when these things emerge. So we kind of I might be mixing the two people up, but you have people that are in their middle age, they haven't been riding bikes or doing these things for a really long period of time. They are seeing some improvements and they have some talent. Like those numbers sounded pretty good to me in terms of
Hmm.
an average
Hmm.
cyclist. And so they're taking it more seriously than just somebody that's riding their bike once in a while, but they may have other things going on both in their more formative years, but also currently that are fighting against the amount of training volume that they're getting. So even though you're riding 8 hours a week, depending on like the intensity of that and stuff like that, that's a lot of time in a week where you're not on the bike. And if you're super stressed, underslept, staying up late, your circadian rhythm is out of whack. You maybe are drinking alcohol on occasionally, even if you're not like drinking, but
Hmm.
all these things can contribute to like dyslipidemia and change, especially if you're genetically predisposed for it. So when you make a change, like I started riding the bike, like so this actually brings us to a really important point about weight loss in general, which I know is like the critical kind of part of this, um, and that is that we want this to be a math problem and we want it to be solvable and we want it to be predictable and we want it to work the way we've decided it should work in our head. So, and it doesn't. It just doesn't work like that. And the more that you can embrace that, the just it's such a weight lifted off of people's shoulders when they realize that you can't make a plan that is rigid and has certain goals. Those are your conscious goals. They're not your lizard brain goals. They're not your biological goals. It's not taking into account all these things that we know about weight and weight fluctuation, losing weight and keeping weight off, and all these different types of things. It's so complex. And when you just say, well, look, 3,500 calories is a pound, 500 calorie deficit per day is a pound per week. Well, that doesn't help when easily with hydration changes and things like this, people that are sensitive to it can change 3 to 5 pounds in a day just from these. It doesn't mean they're losing tissue. And and when you when you say, "Well, I'm gonna lose a pound a week for the next 10 weeks and I'll be 10 pounds lighter," it never works like that. It never works like that. And
Right.
if you are 10 pounds lighter at the end of that 10 weeks, it's usually like that it seems to happen. It doesn't it's like
It doesn't
you see
linearly
nothing.
step
It's
down.
not linear. This process is
Yeah.
not linear because I tell my students this all the time. We're complex biological systems. We are not math problems. It's not gonna work the way you think it makes sense in your head. So it
Yeah.
could make a lot of sense that, okay, I up my steps, I've increased my training, but if you work 60 hours a week and you eat at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night and you've kind of had a history of like questionable nutrition practices and you enjoy 4 or 5 drinks a night on Friday and Saturday, and I'm coming at this with a very non-judgmental way. I'm just coming at it.
Right.
I'm reiterating what you were saying, which is that if we zoom out, we can identify a whole bunch of things that may be getting in the way, even though you think you're doing this thing that should have like a one-to-one response. Like, I do this, I get this. And it
Hmm.
doesn't work like that. The other thing is that people that are aging, I've noticed this with my own body, like it just gets harder to get to the place where you wanna get because of a whole host of reasons, aging, hormone changes, all these different types of things, and then you have this whole other thing about, um, in women, perimenopause, menopause, and all these hormonal changes and all these different types of things, and all of this really matters, and it's so complex. Um
Hmm.
that it's really I would say, like, from big picture standpoint, if somebody wants to lose weight, 1, don't put expectations around it. Like, we have to let your body do its thing.
It's
2,
like committing to a lifestyle and
exactly.
sticking to that, and then you let it do its thing.
And even that doesn't have to be, like, so it can be pretty simple. It doesn't have to be super militaristic or like very like, oh, discipline
Mhm.
grind every day. I can never do this. So there's a couple things we look for. One is you if you don't think the choice you're about to make is sustainable for the rest of your life, then it's a diet. It's nothing but a diet. And it will only be, you will only be able to do this temporarily. So when you say lifestyle change, that's the bar I put it up against. Could I do this for the rest of my life? And not, so this is where things like time restricted feeding fall apart, in my opinion, because like if you say I'm only going to eat between the hours of 2 and 6 every day, and that gives
Yeah,
me
it's just not
it gives me a 20-hour
just not
fast every
possible.
day. And it's like, what do you do when you travel? What do you do on holidays? What do you do on, and I've actually challenged people not, I don't want to, I'm not a combative person. Like I've had discussions with people when I've given talks about this where they said, well, I do this, and they explain this super complicated thing. And then I say, well, do you celebrate Thanksgiving? And they say, yeah. What do you do on Thanksgiving? They say, oh, I just back it up. And they make all these adjustments to like make it work.
Mhm.
And it's like, hey, not to like, I think that's great, but you're justifying this thing that isn't the same as the physiology you're putting your body under. It's just making you mentally feel like you've done this thing. So by definition, this isn't sustainable. And but there are sustainable things that you can implement on a daily basis. And if you do those and hold to them, your body will go to where it's supposed to go.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point. And if you look at and I have this conversation a lot with my runners, with my cyclists, because there is this like pressure to be light, and people say, "I want to be light. I want to," and people call me, "Oh, I want to be this," or I've seen myself in pictures, and I don't look as lean as this rider or that rider. So the place we go to one is like this very kind of like open, safe, um, like but without shying away from the reality that if you can maximize strength to weight ratio, you will perform better. It's just a fact. Like it's a fact in
Mhm.
gymnastics, it's a fact in running, it's a fact in cycling, it's a fact in cross country skate. There's a whole bunch of like ways, there's a whole bunch of evidence for this. Having said that, the powerlifting podium and the 1500-meter podium at the Olympics, those two things look very different.
Yeah.
And so we're not saying like anything goes or whatever. Like you can, like this
Mhm.
person can just like say, well, I got my power lifting and the clean and snatch gold medal. Now I'm going to work for the next 4 years and get my gold medal in the 1500. It doesn't work like that. And that seems
No.
obvious, but I'm trying to make a point here. But within the 1500-meter podium, there is no set body type that is won. If there were, then weight, body fat percentage should be a KPI. And when coaches use body fat percentage and weight as a KPI, it backfires every time. Like when they say this is going to happen to your performance when you get to this point, we need X percent body fat, we need this amount of weight, we need this amount of power, it backfires every time. And I shouldn't be so exact about that. I have seen it backfire a lot.
Yeah.
And the reason is that you can't go and chase somebody else's body type because it's not, they have different genetics than you. What we want to do is embrace the talent that you've been given, put your body in a position to get to where it needs to get in a really healthy way, and then let your body do its thing. Trust that it's going to do its thing. And there are ways to do that safely, healthily in a healthy way and sustainable. And that's kind of
Yeah.
what you have to, and then within that, you don't get to decide if you have a six pack or you have shredded calves or that's just like, I want to be 6'8", 280. like LeBron, but it ain't gonna happen no matter what
Yeah.
I do in terms of no matter how much time I spend in the gym, how much I sleep in the hyperbaric chamber, how much I like that part of it is what it is. And once you get past that and you embrace it and you go, okay, I'm gonna put myself in this position over time, I'm gonna let my body do its thing. And it's really, really important. We never put a time frame on it. We never say like, okay, over the next 6 weeks, we want to be here. Or within the next 8 weeks, you want to lose this much. And when I see clients or people or even students that do their dietary assignment, dietary plan, like we do some exercises to learn how to track diets and stuff like that. And if they say their goal is to lose a certain amount of weight, gain a certain amount of muscle in a certain amount of time, we have a frank discussion about why that might not be, not for that individual, but in general, you're training to be potentially like a trainer or coach or a health professional or something like that. We want to get out of that like style of thinking. It's
Mm,
like a
yeah.
calorie is not a calorie. A certain amount of calories are not exactly equal to one. But we have so many compensatory mechanisms and changes and defense systems, and different people are totally comfortable with being non-economical and not holding on to excess weight. And they just like stop eating for a couple days and they look at everyone's experienced this where them and a workout partner, you start the same training program on January 1st, and you do the exact same thing in the gym in the exact same way, and you get the exact same amount of sleep. And let's say you even live together. So you're sharing meals and you're meal prepping and you're doing all these things. And after 6 weeks, your roommate is lost 15 pounds, looks amazing, feels amazing, and you feel like crap, have gained 5 pounds, have you're just what you've applied to the system, you're not a responder to. So you have to go look for a different stimulus under those circumstances. People
Yeah.
blame themselves a lot under these circumstances. They say, "What am I doing wrong?" And it's like, what you're doing wrong is you're sticking to a plan obstinately that you're not a responder to. But you're
Mm,
not you're there's nothing wrong with you. Like you just put your body in a position to do its thing, and then we trust that. And I have that conversation a lot with elite athletes all the way to like, middle-aged folks that want to get ready for some event or class reunion or
yeah.
something.
So, Kyle, you mentioned the basic lifestyle changes. This is personal to me because I committed to some lifestyle changes over the last 9, 10 weeks, and I was able to see fat loss as a result of that. However, I never set a single goal on it, just like you said, which I
Sure.
feel great about that. It just happened. It didn't happen perfectly linearly either, just like you said. But I want to cover what are some basic principles that you would recommend a person follow if they're
Mhm.
trying to adopt that lifestyle change that is sustainable. What are some decisions they can make or some actions they can do with their nutrition that would help?
So it's a great question. So the first thing as athletes is that it's unique. Cycling and running are really unique because of the schedule where
Mm,
you have these like you kind of have a tiered level of events that you want to be ready for, but there are these like golden events that you really want to be on for. And so for some, that may be my goal this year is the Leadville 100. For others, it's world championships, or others, it's no, I want to win the overall. So you kind of have to contextualize what your goals are and when those key things are, because you cannot be in like, just like you wanna peak with your fitness, you can't be on year round unless you're, like, doing things illegally. So,
right.
if you're a clean athlete, then you have to kinda pick and choose these spots, and there are times when if the buildup has gone right, if everything else has gone right, if overall health is right, if all these things, injuries are right, sleep is right, all these things, you can kind of like go for it in a way that is unsustainable in the long term, but will get you to this point that is like will help you achieve the goal that you have for that instance. But you have to understand that's not what we're talking about here or what we're going for year round. That's probably a completely different podcast, which is like, how many weeks do you need? What do you do? When do you freak out when it's not happening? What do you do? Like, and the answer is you should never freak out. You should just stick to the system, because it's amazing the way the body knows when it's getting ready for a big event and how it settles into like where it wants to be as you as an athlete in that year at that time at that point, and allows you to achieve your potential. And that part of it takes a lot of sacrifice and a lot of like careful tracking and a lot of blood work and a lot of other things like that. In general, though, the sustainable program that we're talking about. So one is, don't expect to be in peak weight, the lightest you've ever been year round. It's not possible. So you need to figure out like, what's my training weight? What's my off season weight? And that doesn't mean you've just completely let yourself go. It's just something that's a little more sustainable and probably a little healthier long term.
Can I share mine for context really quick?
Yeah.
So what I've found that for me in off-season weight, I tend to go somewhere between 100 and like somewhere close to 160 pounds, 155 to 160 pounds. And then if I'm going to be like performing really, really well, I'm going to be somewhere around 155 down to like 152-ish pounds, 150-ish pounds.
Yep.
And it seems to go up every year a little bit.
Yes, that is common.
Yeah. But so it's not like some big radical swing. And I'm sure that you wouldn't see that in a lot of athletes.
No.
You're not talking about
this
20
is when
pounds or
we're
something.
getting like so greedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about a 1,500 meter race where gold, silver, medal were separated by less than half a second, like you're taking like that's what I'm talking about there. For most people, the approach is so the key here, and this isn't like earth-shattering or groundbreaking or anything like this, but the first mistake people make is they weigh 180 pounds, they want to weigh 150 pounds, so they start eating as if they weighed 150 pounds. When you do that, you become malnourished and your body pushes back. You may lose a little bit of weight early on, and then pretty soon the body goes like, okay, we're not getting nearly enough nutrients that we've been seeing for years and years and years, and we've increased our activity and we've decreased what we're taking in. So we're going to just start cutting corners on a lot of things and breaking. And I'm being very high level with this, but basically what it says is like the body just goes like, no, I'm just not. And gets people into a lot of trouble because their metabolism slows down. They stop recovering as well. Their sleep gets disturbed. There's all these different things that hormonal imbalances can occur. There's all these different things because your body has these compensatory measures, because it goes like, hey, we were pretty like healthy and going along, and now all of a sudden our circumstances have changed and we don't know. Like, again, your lizard brain doesn't know you live during the only time in human history where food availability was absolutely zero issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So we have no issue with food availability. So you're looking around at all this food all the time and saying, but for some reason, all of a sudden, after 30 years of having a lot of food availability, now we have this significantly altered availability and we're having to work more. So we got to like make some changes if we want to hold on to this body that we've developed that's done pretty good for 30 years. And again, I'm speaking very high level here. So the thing that works, seems to work in a lot of cases, is to basically you have to eat for slightly less than what you currently weigh. And once you get to that, then you can lower it a little bit more. So you need, and this comes down to a lot of like macronutrient calculations. So like if you weigh 180 and you want to get to 150, the most you can calculate your macros for is probably 172, between 172 and 175. And then when you get to 176, 175, that's like probably tissue loss. That's outside of the, if you get to 174, it's probably outside the just daily, fluctuation, hydration fluctuation. So then from there, now all of a sudden you can make your goal weight 168 or 167 and calculate your macros for that. And that's kind of how we move down. So it seems to be a way that the body seems to respond a little bit better too, because it just doesn't feel like it's under so much threat. This is the way I interpret it. Again,
Yep.
someone out there could like be studying this mechanistically and know exactly how to say it, but this is kind of my interpretation of it. And then in practice, we've seen this. So if we try and do too much too soon, body pushes back. If you do it, and not just a little bit at a time, in the sense of it's a real change, but you just do it, and then you have to track, which means you have to weigh yourself. You don't have to weigh yourself every day. We can do once a week, whatever, once every 2 weeks, and then you make that adjustment based on what you see. 2 is your protein and fat are really, really important in this process. Like, protein is super important because it's the basis for all our tissue. It's the basis for our structural tissue. It's the basis for a lot of different things we need. We know that the recommended daily allowance is 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight. That will keep you out of like frank diseases associated with frank protein deficiency. But we know, and it's well established, and we've talked about this, that athletes especially, and probably everybody, can benefit from significantly more of that. So we usually go somewhere around 1.4, 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, but you do that for the goal weight, which is a reasonable way in either direction of your current weight. So, a lot of younger athletes need to put on weight, like baseball players, football players, basketball players. They're 16, 17, they need to add weight. You can't start eating. You see this mistake a lot in high school and college kids where they say, "Oh, I'm in a bulking phase." And basically what that means is, this is my excuse to eat a ton of junk food and whatever I want and gain as much weight as possible. And then they say, "I'll cut later." And I'm just trying to put on as much mass as possible. And you can't do it that way either. Like, you'll just gain a bunch of body fat doing it that way.
Yep.
And that actually becomes really difficult to lose a lot of times, especially if you're not genetically defending a much lower body fat percentage. And so you kind of want to do it in these increments. So let's say we're 180, we want to weigh 155. First of all, we don't even know if that's a realistic for your muscle mass, for your bone density. You may have super thick bones and they're dense, and you have a big brain, and you have like all different types of things. Like, 157 might not be possible, but let's just see what your body is capable of. So we're going to start at 180. We'll go to 172, convert that into kilograms, and then multiply and try and get 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight per day. We want to get 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight of fat per day for that goal weight, which is within shooting distance of your actual weight. Those two things are, like, in my approach, are non-negotiable because they are long-term nutrients. I've made this joke before, probably on multiple podcasts, which is, if you undereat and fat and all of a sudden you have all kinds of hormone imbalances and all kinds of issues, I can't just like have you eat a bowl of Crisco and your like fat metabolism is back. And same with protein, right? Like, if you're under in protein and then all of a sudden you're overtrained, you're under recovered, you're not sleeping, all these different things because you've been chronically nickel and diming yourself from a protein standpoint, then I can't just have you eat a side of cow, like a quarter of a cow, and you're back. Like, it takes easily as long to get out of that hole as it took to get into it. Where carbohydrates are completely different in terms of how they act as a nutrient. You could never eat a carbohydrate again and be okay. Now, would you do well on the bike? No. Would you feel good? Probably not. Would you, like, now I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, you will feel good because you're keto, all this stuff. So, but for most people, there are some high responders to zero carbohydrate approaches. But carbohydrates are this thing that you can fill, even if you didn't eat carbohydrates for a year. in 3 meals, I could have your glycogen stores back up to what they were the day. I mean, maybe even in one, like 1.5 meals, like you can get that back really quickly.
Yeah.
Now, so that means that's the factor that we can manipulate when we're trying to lose weight the most. So you have to hit your protein goal, you have to hit your fat goal, you modulate carbohydrates. How
And for
aggressive?
fat per kilogram, roughly,
1
what
to
do you recommend?
1.2, yeah,
Great.
grams per
Perfect.
kilogram
Cool.
body weight. So
And then on carbs, where are we
so
at?
carbs can vary, right? And it's really interesting because when you look at the RDA for carbs for adult, do you know what the recommendation is? It's not in grams per kilogram body weight. It is 120. That's it across the board for everybody. And
Whoa.
it's literally based on, at least my understanding of it is based on the fact that that's about what's estimated for an adult brain goes through that much sugar in a day. So it's basically
Wow.
saying for like an average person that's just sort of doing yard work and activities of daily living and maybe going on a walk and stuff, you really don't need like a ton of carbohydrates. 40 grams per meal, make your brain happy, make your attitude happy, give you some variety in your food choices. And you're kind of like, that will work for a lot of people. And like we go as low as that for people that aren't athletes that want to lose weight. For athletes that are required to perform on a regular basis, we have to have carbohydrates in there, but it doesn't mean they have to be there all the time. And I think too often there's too much of an emphasis on replacing food that you burned in a workout instead of front loading the energy that you need for the workout. So like for us, just a little bit of insight into our approach at kind of the most basic level is just like we don't go into workouts underfueled and we don't worry about eating a ton. If we're so starved after a long Saturday ride, like so we'll take Keegan. Like if Keegan does the shootout in the winter, and is that what that thing is called? That like
Yeah.
group, that
Yeah.
famous
Yeah, it
group
is.
ride? Okay.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
know I'm getting this right. Okay. So if Keegan does the shootout on Saturday, I think, and maybe it's on Sunday. I think it's on Saturday. So if he does the shootout on Saturday and he like cannot wait to get to the buffet, then I messed up on his Thursday and Friday.
Yep.
Right.
Makes
Like the
sense. No,
emphasis
you
has to
mentioned,
be,
Kyle,
yeah.
you mentioned a principle for this that I applied over the last 10 weeks that was very helpful.
Mm,
And it was specifically looking at focusing on your prior 2 meals, making sure that I was conscious about the carbohydrates that I was taking in on the prior 2 meals.
yes.
It didn't mean that I was taking in 6 servings of rice or
Right.
something. It just meant that I made sure that I wasn't skimping on carbohydrate.
Correct.
And I made sure that if I was in a decision point where I was thinking less or more, in that situation, I would go lean towards slightly more in those 2 meals prior. And then after that, just like clockwork, as long as I took a recovery drink and I followed that, I could do a 4-hour hard ride or even a 6.5-hour race coming into it. And afterward, I didn't feel like, oh, I need to eat
I have
absolutely
to eat.
everything.
I'm so depleted.
It's amazing.
It's
It's a
amazing.
huge change. And I know
So
it sounds really simple, but it's profoundly impactful when you follow that principle of the 2 meals prior,
I tell this
making
story
sure
a
that
lot.
carbohydrates are
Like,
centric.
sorry, I started cutting you off. Sorry.
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
So I tell this. I use this as an example. I had a runner one time that was like, in one of the things that people can do that I think is kind of interesting is just instead of like you can track, and there's tons of trackers, and there's even some AI things now that are trying to like break into cycling and things like that. But one of the things you can do is like that gives you perspective is literally take a picture of everything you eat and drink for a week. Don't look at it. And then just take the picture, put it into the notes. Take a picture, put it in the notes. And the pictures are time stamped and everything like that. And then let that sit for 3 or 4 days after you're done doing that for a week, and then go back and review it. You'd be shocked at how bad your recall and how bad your biases are in terms of what you think you do on a regular basis in terms of nutrition versus what is like irrefutable evidence of what you actually did. Because people
Yep.
just super quickly forget like the handful of chips that they grabbed as they were walking by the thing, or the bread and butter that they were snacking on while they were, and the glass of wine they were while they were preparing dinner. Like those things don't go into the, but if you do it for everything that you literally, it really forces you to slow down and be mindful of what you're putting in to the system. And it's a really interesting exercise. And I can remember like reviewing this one time with somebody, and I was like, "Hey, so like Friday and Saturday, like not a lot of food intake." They're like, "Yeah, well, Saturday is my day off, so I didn't want to eat." And I was
Mm.
like, "All right, well, how'd the run go Sunday morning?" "Oh, it was horrible. I felt so bad." "What'd you do immediately afterwards?" "I had to go straight to like the brunch spot, and I had all this stuff because I had the pictures." Right? And
Mhm.
I was like,
Mhm.
I don't care if you're eating a lot when the thing you were supposed to put quality work into is already done and wasn't done to the level that you're capable of. The whole point of training is stimulating the system in a specific way at a specific rate for a specific amount of time. And in order to accomplish that, you have to be fueled. Now, leaving that, as long as you take your recovery drink and you hit your protein and fat intake for the 24-hour period that you're in, like you can, again, I'm not going to say eat no carbohydrates because your brain needs carbohydrates. Your body does need some carbohydrates for recovery. But these, like, when you look at the studies about like you have to take in this many carbohydrates, for example, to replenish your glycogen after training, and that we're more receptive to glycogen storage in the post exercise state, that is true, but not to like a performance enhancing level. Not when you do those studies, they're very elegant studies and they're very cool, and they show you can go through carb depletion, eat a massive amount of carbohydrates, and force your body to store more glycogen, but not to where it would make some sort of immense difference in a 6 hour
Mhm.
race that you couldn't get in multiple meals leading up to that. So this race to replenish carbohydrates, I think, is really overstated, and I think people seem to benefit a lot from making sure they're going into key workouts fueled, and coming out of those workouts, they are um, being responsible in terms of their carbohydrates.
This is the one thing I noticed when following this approach too is that you don't have to fear like not being able to replenish them because if you're following any sort of training schedule, after you train, you may have one meal, and then after that, the next meal is one where you're taking in more
You're taking in
carbohydrates
more
because you've got to
carbohydrates
train
to get
again.
back. Yeah.
So it's
And
like,
it's even when you start getting into those times where like, okay, we're getting greedy. Now we're looking at the training schedule with a microscope and going, okay, this is like zone 2 and it's
mhm,
gonna suck, but we're gonna get away with it from little car, or like Wednesday, I have a full day off. And then Thursday is like an ease back into a day. It's not a full go day.
mhm,
So that's where you can really make hay. If you have a day off followed by a moderate day, that's when you can really make hay. And again, it
mhm,
doesn't have to be the same caloric deficit every day. You are looking for caloric deficits, you're looking for manageable caloric deficits through modulating carbohydrates in a sustainable way over weeks and months, not every single day. Because like you
yes,
could, if Tuesday's your hardest day of the week, you're probably going to technically overeat on Monday. But if we're just talking about it as a
mhm,
math problem, right? But it's not really, it's not, this is why I don't even think of days as breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because they're, everything is everything is dependent on the goals of the individual, the what they respond to, the level that they're at, and the type of season that they're in. But someone like this gentleman, like I was saying, I'm 180, I want to weigh 160, or I want to weigh 155. To me, the only chance for somebody to kind of like do that would be to implement some sort of system like this, where you know what your training schedule
Over a
is.
very long time course.
Yeah, but I don't know, maybe he's a super high responder and
That's a good
when
point.
we see these people on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever, and they say like, look, my the one that just is the best is when they say, I'm not special. Anyone can do this. All I did is, and then they state some crazy thing that literally they pulled a lottery ticket because
Yeah.
they tried something crazy that their genetics happen to be a super high responder to, which is the literal definition of specialness. That's
Yeah.
all they are, is special. And they say, I'm not special. I just did this for 3 weeks. And then I had this like amazing six pack and I had this like, and usually when you dig into folks like this, you find out that, oh, they were on like a Division I scholarship. They were athletes their entire lives.
Yeah.
They have immense talent. They just kind of like didn't train for a couple of years, got what was to them out of shape, and then did this crazy thing and got into super shape, and now they're trying to sell you on it. Like they are
Yeah.
literally the definition of unique and special. So don't, like, the process from like the thing that's going to give you the best chance is if you go slow, you keep your macronutrient goals within kind of a close distance of the actual weight that's currently there. You always hit your protein, you always hit your fat, you stay fueled for workouts, and then you modulate carbohydrates to varying degrees of aggressiveness depending on the time of year, the goals that are coming up, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And it's just like a formula that's worked across a whole bunch of different, like, body types, ages, athletes, sports, things like that, and it's just,
Yep.
like, what we've kinda settled on. Now, there's a lot it's a lot more kind of, like, involved and sophisticated when we get to, like, when we're talking about Keegan or Kate or Josh or these type of people, but that's the point, is like, that's why you get help when you wanna, like, get to the place where you wanna get. But just from a general kinda overview, this is what the formula seems to
Yep.
be, at least the one that we kind of build from. Is this
Yeah,
helpful?
absolutely.
I
Yeah, this is
I always feel like
fantastic,
I'm, like,
Kyle.
blabbing so
And
much, but
no, this is great. I think those are great takeaways. And the last thing that I want to say, and this isn't an ad for Kyle or anybody else,
mm,
but if you feel like you're following that and you feel like you're stuck at a roadblock, boom, great opportunity to bring in a certified professional that can help you with it.
yes,
Whether that's a dietitian with experience working with endurance athletes or a nutritionist that has experience working with endurance athletes, food coach, whatever you want to call it. That's where, if you feel like you're implementing those things and you feel like, or if you feel like you need help implementing those things, that's also another great use case to bring somebody in. But if you feel like you're stuck, that's when you bring somebody in, because then they can help you break down why it may not be happening. Or if you are a person that isn't a hyper responder, like we talked about there, that person can then guide you through the longer term approach that you need to take
absolutely.
and guide you
Mhm.
through that. So I hope that's helpful for
Yeah, and
everybody listening to this.
while staying healthy and improving health, right? We do wanna
Mm,
have those, we want those annual checkups to be holding steady and going in the right direction and not doing those little ticks up each year where the doctor
mhm.
goes, "Oh, you're still doing fine, but it is like we have a trend here now," or "You're still," and then, it becomes so much more complicated as we age, and so that's when, like, you do wanna have people that can say, "Hey, now we're talking about like a level of resistance to responding that we wouldn't have expected. So are there underlying things? So now let's call in the endocrinologist and the doctor and the like the great sports psychologist. Her name's Kristen Kime. She's worked in cycling a lot. I think she's really good at what
Mhm.
she does, and her mantra for a long time was, "It takes a village," and I agree. Like, not one person can know everything, but what you want to do. So in addition to seeking out the help, I think you're also sort of looking for those, this might not be like the best way to say it, but those kind of yellow flags of like, if you sit down and the first thing that says is, well, we need to create a 500 calorie deficit per day because that equals 1 pound per week. And that's gonna, maybe they're not getting this from a complex physiology standpoint that the way you would want. And there's plenty of people out there that do get it. And so you just kind of want, just like it may take a couple times to find the right therapist, like mental health
Yep.
professionals, sometimes like you're looking for the right fit. And so don't be afraid to kind of say, well, introduce these things, because they should, you want them to like be thoughtful people that you're asking to help you with these types of things. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's just
absolutely,
another
Kyle.
thing. Be looking for those things like you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to follow this 4-step plan,
Mm,
you have to go to restricted eating, we have to get you on keto, you have to take these things.
red flags.
Yeah, like when I have the opportunity to work with people, and like I do not take it for granted, but then the other part of it is I really, I try and meet them where they are, not in a way that is just like I tell them everything's okay and they don't need to make any changes, but let's just like do these things and make sure they're right for you. And because there's always a way. But
Yeah,
different people are different responders to different things. So I don't know. A
yeah.
mentor of mine used to say, if someone from nutrition tells you something with absolute certainty, they're either don't know what they're talking about or they're trying to sell you something
That's the
because
truth. Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
complex.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Very well said.
yeah.
Well, if you want to be under the tutelage of Kyle, go to Eastern Oregon
Oh,
University. If
jeez.
you want to, pretty sweet.
You could.
If you
That's
enjoyed this podcast, you can let us know down in the
yeah.
comments below. Ask any other additional questions you have. If we missed something that you feel like, or if you have an additional question, let us know. That can help Kyle and I prepare for the next time we have Kyle on. And then also, if you want to become a faster cyclist, we talked a lot about the weight side of things. On the power side of things, we work tirelessly here at TrainerRoad, developing our own AI from scratch, using our own data set to try to find the best ways to give you the right workout that's going to make you faster.
We were
We
talking
don't
about
just,
this. We were talking
yeah,
about this
yeah,
offline beforehand. This is crazy.
yeah.
Like,
Has to, yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
We can't
cool.
record those conversations yet. Exciting times soon. You'll
It's
get to
awesome.
see some new stuff that we're working on. If you want to become a faster cyclist, sign up with TrainerRoad. It's so insanely cheap. It can be as much as $17.50 a month, as cheap as that. That's like a Chipotle burrito with guac, and it'll make you faster. Most people see 10 watts improvement at least within the first month. So
Awesome.
if you want to do that, go sign up at trainerroad.com. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Sounds good. Thank you.